Ready? Yep. So, hello everyone. My name is Aris, and I'm the JS monthly organizer. Today we have an online August meetup. We have two speakers, Daniel Norman, making MongoDB type safe with Prisma, and Peter Perlepes, talking about fully featured auth for your Next.js and Prisma app with Clerk. Before we do that, I'm going to take you through. My name is Aris Markogiannakis, and I'm the organizer of JS Monthly together with Milos and Richard. You can find me on Twitter at Aris Marko. I'm also the founder and organizer of CityJS conference. We have a conference in a month, so join us. I'm also an ambassador for Prisma. If you're interested in joining us and helping us with organizing meetups, we are looking for new faces. So you can just mail us at jsmonthly@gmail.com and you can tell us if you're interested. We have a big event coming up on the 17th of September 2021 at the Neverland Fulham Beach Bar. It's the first in-person event after and during pandemic. Together with Hubstack conference, CityJS is organizing an event with 9 speakers from Europe and London. We're having another event on the 26th of August with 3 speakers. You can sign up and RSVP on the meetup .com website. Ask you to thank you.
Hey, is everything okay? I think either
Yes.
me or you lost the connection. All is good?
Yeah.
Okay. Should we bring up Peter or Daniel now, or?
Let's bring Peter first, and
All right.
then we can leave Daniel at the end.
Okay, sorry about that. I think my connection broke. Alrighty, cool. I'm doing that.
Hello, Peter.
Hello, Aris. Yeah, certainly. So
you can share your screen, and I'm gonna go off and mute, and you take over the stage.
Yep, cool.
Thank you.
Let me know. Yeah, let me know when you can see my screen. Probably. Yep. Probably everything's good now. So, really glad I get to join you guys in this lunchtime meetup. Thank you, Ari. And certainly, I hope you see something that is of your interest. So, this is my talk, fully featured auth for your Next.js Prisma app with Clerk. So my name is Peter Perlepes, and I'm a software engineer at Clerk. I'm really excited about this talk, and honestly, every time we go about presenting how you can add authentication and user management on a modern JavaScript stack with Clerk, I am myself really surprised how well it fits with other great tools like Prisma. So we will see that in action during the talk. So just a few words about me. First of all, I really am a JavaScript fanboy and have been working with it directly or indirectly probably my whole career. And it never ceases to amaze me how fast it is evolving to tend to the needs of all this modern software that we're getting used to. Another topic which is of my interest and has been my main job for quite a while is user analytics and how we can track and recognize user behavior. And finally, there probably has not been a better time for us, the web performance enthusiasts, now that it has become one of the hottest topics for the web platform. And finally, for that matter, I have the honor of having the title of an invited expert at the World Wide Web Consortium, where I work on trying to define what tools and capabilities we can give developers, all for just a faster web. And the experience has been nothing short of amazing. So let's get to it. A little bit about Clerk. So what we have devised as a brief punchline of what we do is next-gen authentication user management. At Clerk, we recognized both the importance and the hurdles involved in building and maintaining a user authentication mechanism that is both secure and continuously satisfies modern user requirements. Like users expect tons of new stuff going on in the authentication space, new providers, and so on, and we're solving that. And certainly our whole offering is around a product that is there for our customers, which are the developers, and for our clients' audience, which are the users. For the first point, certainly developer experience and security is first class for us. They are the two most important aspects of the offering of what Clerk is. And certainly adding and configuring all these tools in a modern stack should be a joy. That's what we believe in. It should be a joy for engineers, and certainly it should be a really pleasant experience for your users. Furthermore, we certainly believe that security should not be an add-in feature, and there we keep the highest possible standards. Briefly, the next points, as you will see later on in the application that we will be building and enhancing with authentication, basically we have some pre-built components and interfaces for you to use directly, which certainly give you a complete, let's say, suite of authentication flows and some additional features for your clients, such as profile editing, device management, and tons more. Let's say our whole philosophy is certainly built around enabling all the more technologies. For example, we have SDKs for Node.js, for Ruby, for Go, more coming soon, but we are really specializing and we are optimizing our service for Next.js and React natured apps. Certainly we have a special relationship with those technologies because we also use them on our own products. But yeah, we plan to roll this out in many more places. So finally, just if you like what you see today and want to try that out, just give it a go with our free forever plan, and certainly you'll find something that certainly fits your interests. Next up, some, let's say, expected features that you would be able to see use by installing Clerk. Multi-session capabilities, as you're used to in other known services, device management, two-step verification, password breach notifications, which we certainly believe it's something really important, and multiple SSO providers. For example, currently we support Google, Facebook, TikTok, GitHub, HubSpot, and more are coming in the future. Some of the components that I talked about, and we will see also inside the application that we'll be building, some of our applications, let's say the sign-up interfaces, the user account interface that's already built for you, and the all familiar user button that probably everyone has seen again. And all these components can either be mounted directly on your application, if we're talking about SPAs or, let's say, some bespoke experience that you would like to create, or they can be hosted on our own URLs. So what we will be building today. Small disclaimer, my connection with design is pretty basic, as you can see, but I really hope that it will certainly show you what we can do just by adding authentication on a simple, kind of a simple actually, post-making application. The stack that this application is composed with is certainly Clerk, Prisma, Next.js, MongoDB, and for all the other features, we have Chakra UI for our UI elements, React hook form, which I'm really amazed how it certainly fits with the rest of the tools. And for this application, we chose to use TypeScript. The code can be found later on in our GitHub repository. The link is there. And let's start going to the code. Now I'll be just starting up, showing a bit of the application. This is the application that we will be enhancing. Let me start up by going through this, and let me show you what we have now. This is, let's say, a simple application where there's no user authentication and like zero user management. And it's pretty basic. We have some posts, there's an author, some content. Everybody can just go ahead and create a post. He can delete a post just with 3 attributes. And as you can probably see, everything is there, open to the public. Let's see a bit. Our API, we have an API about posts, which is also not protected by any kind of authentication. As we can see, everything's open. So let's see how we can go ahead and add authentication on our API and the whole client side of the application using Clerk. Let's go over first with the setup. This is the skeleton of the application. It's a Next.js app, which is split between the server part of the application, the client part, and certainly some configurations and documentation. What you can see on my screen now is the Prisma schema that we have used for this application, which it uses the, as of lately, preview MongoDB connector for Prisma, which certainly I'm pretty excited about, and it was really a pleasure and a joy using that. We have a simple, let's say, definition of what we call a post. It has an ID, created attribute, a title, body, views, and an author. We've added some, let's say, constraints using the directives from the Prisma tool, which I also find really useful. So how would we go about adding authentication? First up, let's go and sign up for our Clerk product. By going through the, let's say, landing on our dashboard after you sign up for the service at clerk.dev, then, sorry, probably everything seems dark, but now everything's better. So what you can do is that you can start by creating an application. You can quick start using Next.js and Vercel, which is like a direct, let's say, integration that we have with the Vercel platform. You can just go ahead and deploy your application in like minutes and sign up with Clerk. Or you can do the standard setup, which is more like we would be creating our application. We can give it one of our brand colors. And yeah, that's it. You're ready. You have your production instance, your development instance, which you can use for development. And then we will see all the goodies that Clerk provides. I've already created an application for our demo, which is the Clerk Prisma demo. And then we can see that, let's say, by going to the home of our development instance that we will be using, basically what we can see is some configuration, some pretty important let's say, information about our instance, some variables, some keys, and certainly some already made for us account hosted pages, which, let's say, when you go visit those, basically you have the let's say the sign up, sign in, or the user profile for this specific application. So how would we add clerk on our application? First of all, we, as you can see, we need to add two packages, which is clerk React and clerk SDK Node. I've already installed those in the application, but certainly you can go ahead and install the latest version of those. And that's about it. The next step that we would need to do is that we would need to add some environment variables specific to clerk. Everything is documented both on our docs and on the README of this application. And these two variables will serve as, let's say, the API key for our backend interactions with our API, and a front-end API key that we will be using for the client side of the application. Now, since everything is done for the, let's say, the boring setup of using clerk, now basically let's see what we would like to do. Going back to the application, certainly we can see that something that we would like to have as, let's say, a separating factor between our users is, let's say, the author email. It could be, let's say, a unique kind of thing, the email of the person signing in on the application. So what better step than just go ahead and enhance our post model with just a simple author email attribute. Let's say we can define that as a string for now, which is required. And just for the showcase, we can also add that on the, let's say, on the unique constraint. Prisma allows us to have unique constraints based on two keys, which I certainly consider pretty cool. And then what we can do is we would need to run again the schema generation command, which for us would be, let's say, a custom command that we have set, which is called schema generate. It uses Prisma's own schema generator and then just creates all the typings for us. So let's see what this will generate. Command, schema is doing its magic. And now we can see that inside the node modules, we have a client folder that has exported some stuff. Let's see what's in there. Probably you will be able to see all the typings that Prisma has already created for you, and then you can use directly on your TypeScript application, which can then, at least in my view, it can help you, let's say, with all the type safety, less errors, and certainly be of assistance to your whole setup. Additionally, it has created many, let's say, many additional typings, which are pretty helpful in many of our, let's say, API interactions with the database. We can see some of those. Let's say what we're doing here is that we are using the generated Prisma types, and we're using them directly on our API, as we will be seeing in a bit. So we have added the author email, and now we're ready to see how we can go ahead and implement actually authentication on the front end. What we need to do, first of all, is we need to make sure that our application is aware of clerk. How we can do that? We're going on since we're in an Next.js application, the most important part is the _app tsx folder. There, what we would need to do is add a component which is called the clerk provider. What the clerk provider does is that it makes sure that our application is aware that clerk is there, and then we can use all the, let's say, the cool stuff that clerk is going to be giving us. Something that we should make sure that we add on Clerk is that Clerk needs to understand what are the, let's say, the navigation patterns of your application. To do that, we need to provide a specific prop, which is the navigate function, which is just, let's say, our preference of a router that our application will be using. For us now, this is just the, let's say, the Clerk, the next router, which, yeah, clearly, this is correct import. And now Clerk is aware about, let's say, the mechanism that it will use to navigate between certain either pages or components that are there for Clerk. And an additional thing is that we need to provide the API key through a specific variable which is called the frontend API. The frontend API is actually the key that we have added before as the next public Clerk frontend API key. So to remind you, we have retrieved that from our Clerk dashboard. It's right here. And what we will be doing is that we're going to be making sure that Clerk provider knows exactly what is the key of our application. So just by using the environment variables as a good practice, we'll be setting the frontend API key on our Clerk provider. So now our application knows about Clerk. If we, let's say, just refresh the application, oh, we need to restart the server. That's something that I'm forgetting all the time. So if we now go ahead and restart the application, probably everything's the same since we've just added Clerk. If you see, there's a Clerk object, but we need now to make sure that we use that in the way that we like. The first feature that I would like to show you is that how we could allow only logged in users to see the content of this page. What we can do is that we can go specifically on the index page. And we see that here there's a post list component, which is just, let's say, the main list of our posts. So how difficult could it be to just make sure that only signed in users can see this thing? Clerk provides us with a component that's called the signed in, which what it will do is that it will, let's say, restrict the access of a specific component tree only to signed in users. So if we go ahead and refresh the application, we can see that nothing's there as we're not signed in on the application. So as a next step, we would need to add some ways that we can sign in and certainly sign out to the application. What I would do is that I will use the layout of the page. This whole thing is our layout. And then what we can do is just add a couple of, let's say, buttons that will be shown in the cases that we have a signed in or a signed out user. Let's go ahead and create a sign in button, which would just be a function. It will be returning button. And this button basically is going to be, it's going to be saying sign in to your posting job. That's definitely a good job. And what we want this button to do is that we want this button to use, let's say, a specific method which would be called sign in. This sign in method can be added directly from Clerk. And this comes from the usage of a specific hook, which is called use Clerk. Pretty easy and straightforward for all you React guys out there. So we just import a function that's called open signin, which what this function will do is that it will open up a sign-in model wherever we are in our application. Let's just add this button somewhere. So let's go to the main layout, which is just, let's say, our pretty nice pattern and the Prisma starter text. And somewhere there, what we would like to do is that we want to add a specific flex box. And then for the signed out users, again, here we'll be using another of Clerk's helpers, which is called the signed out. Pretty straightforward. And what we want to add here is our sign-in button. Now let's see what happened in the application. Oh, yeah, there's a button which, if we go and see what it does, is that it opens up in place a sign-in model where, let's say, our users can just sign in or go on, sign up, etc. Something that I would really like to show you is that, let's say, some of the settings that we can add on our application is, let's say we're going on the settings and we want to add an additional, let's say, single sign-on provider. We just add, let's say, Facebook, we apply the changes, everything has been saved successfully. And just like that, we have one more provider for our application. So let's add, let's say, an additional button, which would be the sign out. And this should only be shown in the case that the user is signed in. And this button could just be a simple sign out button. Let's just make it this way, which just be, again, another button which now will use the sign out method directly imported from Clerk. And then it just returns us different kind of button, which it could say just sign out. Color scheme of red. And certainly on click, we can say sign out. Yes, and then here we just add it. Sign out. Something's probably wrong here, but everything's gonna be good. Oh, come on. Yes. Oh, probably I forgot to do that. Sign out button. Now, let's say when we just refresh, we can sign in. I will just select Google, select one of your accounts. And basically now only authenticated users can see our specific list. And then by just signing out, everything's back to normal. So let's see, this is, let's say, the first let's say, step of authentication. So what we would need to do is that, let's say we want to secure our API also, because now, again, all the functions of our API are open. So let's see how we can make the API listen only to authenticated requests. What we're going to do for the showcase is that we're going to be protecting the basic post retrieval API, which is directly in the API posts index. For those of you that are versed in the Next.js structures, basically now we're in the API routes of Next.js, and inside that we just have a function that just queries things from our Prisma database. And what happens there is that we just retrieve those and we send them as JSON to the client. What we want to make sure is that this API is protected only to authenticated users. And let's see how we can do this with Clerk. With our SDK for Node.js applications, we ship some, let's say, middleware, which can be used on Next.js and also Express.js applications. This middleware will allow us to, let's say that only users that, let's say only clients that have some session information would be allowed to hit, let's say, this specific API endpoint. All the other users will just see, let's say, 41 as they would be unauthorized. Let's see how we can go about doing that. The only thing that we would need to add, for our case, we will make it required, is a middleware which is called required session. This middleware, which is exported directly from the Clerk SDK node, what it does is that it makes sure that only authenticated users can hit this API. If we go ahead and see now, just let's say the network, and we grab the GET request of this specific service, and we heat this up. Basically, now the status of this is 41, and it gives us, because we're in development, it gives us a helpful message which is called no client found. Again, Clerk takes care of that automatically. And also what it does is that it provides us with all the required session information inside the request. How we, let's say, would go about that is that the request.session attribute could be populated with Clerk specific and session information and session end user information. As we can see, the next API request type does not have this attribute already, which is expected. So what we would need to do if we're using TypeScript is that we would need to use another Clerk helper, which will take the request object that's coming from Clerk, from Next.js, and enhance it with a session attribute. As you can see now, TypeScript does not complain, and we have access to all the good stuff that Clerk provides us. Let's see how we can, say, go about doing something, like how we could go about creating, let's say, the post method that would only, let's say, allow users to just create some new post. Here in the post method, which is the specific routes that it's called whenever, let's say, we try to create a new post, we see that we just get the request body, which for now it's just, let's say, some attributes about the new post. And what we do is that we're using Prisma create post function, which is already built in there. And what happens is that it creates a new post, but now it's not aware of let's say, of the author email that we have added. So if we try to create a new post, this will certainly break. And I really love Prisma and the type safety that provides here. So let's see how we could go about retrieving the user email directly from our request. Let's say, since we're in this part of the code, we know that, let's say, the user is already authenticated. In any other case, you would receive the message that you saw previously. So say we would like to retrieve the primary email address. And by primary here, we mean, since Clerk can support some specific, let's say, some multi-session applications, that means that a user might have multiple emails, but for now, for the showcase, we just want to retrieve the primary one. And we're using a function which is just a helper that I created, which it just takes a Clerk instance that we have for the application and then searches through the user email addresses until it finds the primary one, the one that that our user is using at this moment. A simple helper, and what we need to do is that we need to make sure that we're giving the user ID so that it understands specifically what user ID we want to retrieve the email from. And just like that, we can just say author email. It would be the primary email address. And now certainly Prisma will not complain because we have added the author email on the specific new post. Actually, what is pretty interesting to me is that these changes do not need to be reflected nowhere on the front end. I mean, on the front end side of the application, we just add the authentication, and then on the backend side, we have access to all the user and session specific information that we can then query and add directly to our database. At least for me, it seems that this is a really nice way to go about architecting the application. There's no obtrusiveness at all. And certainly there is one safe place, which is the backend, that you can enhance any attributes that you send up for storage. So what will happen with this change? Let's say we try to, again, sign in. We're using our favorite Google account. And now we would like to create a new post. Let's say it could be called a test post. Let's add some original content. And then the author would be Peter and certainly at clerk. So if everything goes well, yeah, here we go. We got a 201 response by the created post. Yeah, everything seems to be going fine. And all the attributes are there. The author email is the correct one. We didn't even need to do anything, as I've mentioned previously. And just like that, in the few minutes that we have that we have spent, we have, even if this in this kind of let's say starter application, we have shown how we can add all the, let's say, the authentication, user information directly on the front end and on the backend side of your application. A few things before I'm done is that, as you can see on the user management aspect, this is your the interface that you will be having by adding a clerk application. You have things like user analytics, some recent signups. This is me going in again and again with different emails. Different, let's say it's the same picture, but it's a different email for my accounts. Total users, active users, signups, etc. Really cool graph from our team. Then we have the users page, which by going in, you can remove, you can view the profile of a specific user, let's say specific information about some of his specific attributes, email addresses, verifications, etc. Settings, which, as I've shown you, you have so many settings that have to do with your authentication and the information you would like to collect from your users. If you have enabled SSO, we have all the providers here. We've shown how easy it is to add some additional ones. You can add passwordless authentication, multi-session, let's say, capabilities, two-step verification. This is also included in the free plan, which I really consider pretty important. And then certainly some things like theming information. We can change so many stuff around the interfaces that we've shown previously, from, let's say, background colors, fonts, fully customizable. And yeah, that could be pretty much it. We're having the, let's say, we can productionize then our application by just adding some additional stuff, which would increase our security. And basically that's it. So thank you. Thanks, everyone. And yeah, I'm open for questions, and for anything, my social accounts and the clerk information are there on the talk. So, yep. Thanks again.
I don't know. Can you hear me?
Yep.
I think in the beginning of the meetup, my laptop overheated because of the heat, here in Greece. I don't know if the picture is changing on the side, but it looks like it's stuck on my laptop.
Yep.
So yeah, that was a good talk. And yeah, I really enjoy how you connected Prisma with Clerk. What was your main takes from using Prisma? What did you learn from using it?
Well, first of all, thank you, Art, for your comments. Let's say the first thing that I really liked is that you guys released the preview of the Mongo connector, and certainly we go ahead and use that. We were pretty excited about that. And two things for me which are amazing, at least in my view, is that how unobtrusive any kind of migrations for your data schema are done by just using Prisma and the generate command. And the second thing, because I really like using TypeScript and connecting all my, let's say, entities around the application in a typed way, certainly the second important thing is how the types that are generated, they allow every part of the application to be connected, type safe, and minimize the amounts of errors just by exporting the types that exist on your data layer, which for us is Prisma. So good job on that, guys.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, something last is that everyone that will visit the Prisma Starter application on GitHub, if you go ahead and explore this a bit, you will see that each and every tool, even the form building library, is connected using the Prisma types. So that's, for me, that's magic.
Yeah, with Clerk Dev, how do you know what are the latest kind of changes that you have done that could help developers in the Jamstack world?
Well, actually, Jamstack is something that is pretty dear to our hearts, and something that we always want, let's say, to move all our products and offerings to. Something that, let's say, as of, let's say, to give you a few updates, especially on the Clerk side of things, we are also going to be releasing in the next few days a specific package, which is for Next.js users, which, for example, even if the setup that we did seemed small, we minimize even that. And the setup for Clerk would be even easier and less obtrusive. For the specifically on the Jamstack side of things, we really strive to just, let's say, remain pretty focused there, meaning on the things that we front-end and JavaScript engineers really love, which, let's say, is our APIs, which are open. We have a Clerk API that anyone can use. JavaScript, our application is more on the JavaScript side and less on the server side. And this is also true about the pre-built interface that we ship. And certainly, we try our best to have the best kind of markup out there, being, let's say, compliant with all the latest standards. So yeah, we're supporters of this, let's say, philosophy, and certainly our product reflects that.
Oh, that's great. I don't know if there are any questions from the public. I cannot see on the channel.
Yeah, in any case, thank you also for your questions, Ari. And everyone can just send me a message even on my personal Twitter, on the Clerk Dev account, and we would be really happy to see everyone on the Discord server that we have. Just come there, say hi, give us your questions, and probably you will be with good company.
Yes, thank you very much. We're gonna move now to the next speaker, which is Daniel Norman, and he's gonna show us how to use Prisma with MongoDB. It's something new, and I think there are many changes. Are they? Because
Hi,
I've been
Aris.
receiving
First of all, thank you for the warm welcome. And yes, there are some changes as we're continuously evolving the MongoDB connector, but I'll definitely get into that.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to hear your talk and find out more about those changes.
Let's do it. Okay, let me just share my screen. And it looks like we have some video lag. Let's see if we can get that. Okay, that should work. So, hi all. Let me just get going here. Make sure it's all running. Great. So the internet connection is fine. Hi, welcome to Making MongoDB Type Safe with Prisma. I think that Peter's talk did a really nice job of showing a lot of the ideas of Prisma in the context of a full stack app. And in this talk, I hope to sort of take a step back and give the sort of broader picture of what it means to use Prisma, what is type safety, and how does that fit in with MongoDB. And I also invite all of you who are watching to send your questions. You can just drop them as a comment in the live chat on YouTube, and I'd be happy to get to those at the end of the talk. So I'd like to begin this talk with a question, and that is, what tools and practices make you productive as an application developer? And I will share a bit of a personal anecdote that I think might inform a lot of the ideas that I want to present in this talk. So about 11 years ago, I started a job as a software developer for a company that was doing web crawling. And the main application that I was working on had been written in PHP and used Postgres as the database. And this application had evolved over the years. There was a lot of spaghetti code in it, but it worked. And we were using SVN. This is prior to us adopting Git at the time, and there were no tests. The backend logic was heavily coupled with templating and front-end logic. We didn't actually have a migration system for the database, so all schema changes were carried out directly on the database, and there was no real way to correlate schema changes with the application code. Nonetheless, I felt very productive. I'd write SQL queries, I'd write business logic and just pump data to the front end. And the main problem there was that I had no guardrails, and often mysterious bugs would pop up after deployment. And so counting on sort of the amount of time that I spent debugging, I was probably not as productive as I thought. Debugging was slow because I would log data as it flowed through my local development environment until I found the root cause. And in hindsight, this is no surprise. Data was flowing across 3 different runtimes, from the database to the PHP runtime and then to the browser. And each runtime had its own representation for the data, and there were no real tools to sort of prevent from mishandling of data. And this was 11 years ago, and a lot has changed since in the software development world with new tools and practices that really focus on preventing such errors. And so in today's talk, we will look at these challenges when working with MongoDB's flexible schema, some of the existing solutions, and finally at Prisma's approach to these challenges. In the first part, we'll explore these practices that increase productivity and introduce some concepts such as the feedback loop. In the second part, we'll delve deeper into the different approaches to schemas in MongoDB. And third, in the final part, we will look at how Prisma makes MongoDB access type safe and increases productivity. So upon reflection on my adventures and misadventures in the last 10 years of building these data-intensive applications, a couple of noteworthy practices came to mind when it comes to productivity. The first is testing, which really allows you to verify the correct behavior of your software, of the software that you're building, and that includes, unit tests, end-to-end tests, load tests. The second is automation, which reduces toil by automating the repetitive aspects of the development lifecycle. And so that, for example, that might include build processes, tests, releases, and deployments that are often automated by your CI/CD pipeline. And finally, type safety, which is a broad term used in the context of statically typed languages like TypeScript and Go. But the idea with type safety is that by defining types in your application code, you can detect these type errors and type mismatches earlier by essentially running the compiler. And of course, with TypeScript, you have built-in integration in VS Code. The same goes, I think, for Go, since I used it a couple of years ago. And so you get this sort of shorter feedback loop, which is, I think, the common thread to a lot of these practices that I mentioned here. And so shorter feedback loops are not a new idea. It's in fact one of the cornerstones of agile development, and it really applies to many stages of the software development lifecycle. And let's start with a definition of what a feedback loop is. So a feedback loop could be defined as the process in which an action's effect circles back to the action that triggered it and then used as feedback. For example, you push a git commit, into continuous integration pipeline starts, and that either passes or not. And when it doesn't pass, it contains useful feedback about what failed. And feedback loops are everywhere in software development, because essentially as a developer, as a team, or even as a company, you're engaging in this iterative process of creation through experimentation. And feedback is so essential because that's how you verify the assumptions, whether those are product assumptions or technical assumptions about, you know, the domain logic that you're implementing in your application. And so feedback loops vary in terms of the amount of time from the action to the feedback. And for example, unit tests are usually very quick to run, whereas end-to-end tests take longer. So the feedback loop is not quite as tight as the one that you get with something like unit tests. So let's see how this idea of feedback loops maps to type safety by comparing JavaScript and TypeScript. And so a type error and we'll start with what is a type error, actually. So a type error occurs when a value in an operation is of a different type from what the code expects. And so JavaScript is loosely typed and doesn't really support type safety. So for example, when you define the following function, this getFullName function, there are a couple of ways in which you can encounter a type error. For example, if you just call it without passing anything in, you will get an uncaught type error. And the main problem here is that you will only detect this type error by actually running the code, meaning that you'll only detect this at the runtime of the code. Now, if you pass an object that doesn't have one of the fields expected by the function, JavaScript won't even throw an error. Instead, it will convert this undefined to a string. And this is a feature known as implicit type coercion in JavaScript. And again, the problem with this is that you only detect these problems at runtime. And in this case, you might even miss it because there's no error being thrown due to the implicit type coercion. In other words, you either rely on your intuition or tests that actually run the code to verify these kind of errors. And so in late 2012, TypeScript came along and suddenly offered developers the following proposition. You add types to your JavaScript and we'll make life easier for you by catching errors for you. And so with TypeScript, you'll have to carry an umbrella, but when it rains, TypeScript will catch these type errors and keep you dry. And so you eliminate this whole class of errors. And TypeScript essentially works by adding type annotations or by defining these types. And by adding these type annotations, for example, here to the function parameters, you can statically verify calls with invalid parameters and many other type errors. And so here you essentially get a type error, and you get that immediately while you're writing the code, assuming that you're using an IDE that has integration. So with VS Code, you get the squiggly lines. And this brings us back to the idea of the feedback loops, because you get a very, very tight feedback loop. Because with VS Code, type errors show up as you type the code, thereby reducing and tightening that feedback loop even further. And of course, you can also run the TypeScript compiler in your terminal and then get the same errors and even integrate that into your CI pipeline. This begs the question, how can we take this idea of type safety and then apply it to the popular three-tier architecture? The boundaries of web applications across 3 tiers, where you have the presentation layer that usually means the web client, or it can even mean just a native app, an iOS or an Android app. There's the application tier, which is where sort of your business, back-end business logic lives, and it does a lot of, it's responsible for sort of the coordination between user requests and the database, and of course, the data tier, which is the source of truth and where your data lives. Now, of course, this is assuming that you're building a data sort of an application that handles data and needs to store data. If you need to store data, like most applications today do, there's a very, very good chance that you're going to be using a database. And so, okay, that was the 3-tier architecture. But since most of the database interactions are encapsulated in the server, in the application tier, what would it look like to introduce type safety there? Let's go back to the code sample that we looked at before and see how this might work if we were to add type safety. And so let's say we wanted to take this function that finds a single user's document and then returns the first name and the last name. Assuming that we wanted to make this type safe, how could we do this? The getUser function first takes an object ID string and then returns a document or an object. This is a challenge because of MongoDB's flexible schema. And this is actually by design. So MongoDB's collections by default do not require their documents to have the same schema. This means that documents in a single collection do not have to have the same set of fields, and the data type for a field can differ across documents within a collection. So just imagine the example that we had Peter show us before, where you had this blog post collection, and that collection had, say, name, and it say it had first name, and then later you decide, I want to introduce last name. There's no way for you to guarantee that once you introduce that all of the old documents will have the last name. And sort of this becomes a real challenge with this flexible schema. If there's no consensus about what the data model should look like, and every document in your collection contains slightly different fields, you end up managing a lot of that complexity in your application layer. So what if we introduce a schema to ensure more consistency across documents in a collection? Which leads us to the second part of this talk, MongoDB and schemas. So there are a number of solutions that have addressed the challenges of a flexible schema, and of course this is by no means an exhaustive list, but these are the very common ones. The first is MongoDB schema validation, which makes it possible for you to enforce a schema per collection. The schema is defined using JSON schema, and it's enforced during updates and insertions. And this approach, of course, the moment that you introduce a schema validation in MongoDB, it only applies to future writes, which means it doesn't impact existing records in your collection. I believe this was also introduced in MongoDB version 3 at some point, and I believe that's sort of a testimony or a sort of a reinforcement to the idea that introducing schemas to MongoDB is an idea worth pursuing. The second approach is Mongoose. Mongoose is a Node.js object data modeling library. It's kind of like an ORM, but mostly targeted at MongoDB. And it allows you to essentially define and enforce this schema on the application layer. And finally, we have Prisma. Prisma is a next generation ORM for Node.js and TypeScript. And central to Prisma is this Prisma schema, which is a human-readable data model. And it is, of course, also declarative, as we saw in Peter's example. And with Prisma, you essentially define the Prisma schema, and the type-safe client is generated for you. And recently we introduced, earlier this year, we introduced the early access version of the MongoDB connector, and in July we also made a lot of progress and promoted that to preview, which is the state that it's currently in, which is the last stage before it reaches general availability, meaning that it is production ready. So, okay, I spoke about these three approaches to introducing a schema to MongoDB. How do these three compare? Well, MongoDB schema validation is enforced on the database layer, whereas Mongoose and Prisma enforce the schema on the application layer. Now, if we compare Prisma and Mongoose, Prisma is unique in that it not only enforces a schema, but it provides type-safe access, which makes you more productive by shortening that feedback loop. So with Mongoose, you get this validation, the schema validation, but that happens at runtime. With schema, as you're actually, with Prisma, as you're actually writing your application code, you get that those type safety verifications happening for you immediately because it's relying on the TypeScript compiler. And so you get sort of, that's why the feedback loop is also shorter. And speaking of schemas, it's worth noting that conceptually speaking, schemas have a lot in common with types. And on the left here, we have a TypeScript type, and on the right, we have an equivalent JSON schema type. And it's interesting because we treat these two things as being different, but actually, as our host today and Peter might attest to, the word schema actually comes from the Greek word schema, which means shape. And so when we speak about schemas and types, really, we're speaking about shapes, and those shapes are used to describe shapes of data. Of course, this doesn't mean that they are the same. They typically operate on different levels. Types are validated during compilation and have no impact on the runtime, while JSON schema is a runtime validation that you do. And this important is difference because you can validate a lot more about the shape of data during runtime, because assuming you have input coming from, say, an API request, that's not something that you can necessarily verify using your type system, because the type system of TypeScript, say, doesn't run actually when your code is running. So Prisma, I spoke and I mentioned Prisma a bunch of times, and it's worth sort of like giving an overview of what Prisma is. So Prisma, as I mentioned, is a next generation ORM for TypeScript and Node.js, and it consists of three tools. The first one is Prisma Client, which is an auto-generated and type-safe database client. This is sort of generated for you based on the Prisma schema. You import that into your application, and then you can sort of start interacting with your database, writing, reading, manipulating, and deleting data. The second one is Prisma Migrate. Prisma Migrate is a declarative data modeling and a customizable migrations tool. And finally, Prisma Studio, which is a modern GUI to view and edit your data. Okay, so let's look at data modeling with Prisma Schema. The Prisma Schema enables easy and intuitive data modeling. I think I mentioned that, and it serves as a single source of truth for your application models. With MongoDB, each model maps to a collection. So each Prisma model maps to a MongoDB collection. And in this model, this example model that we have this ID field, which maps to the underscore ID, the default ID field in MongoDB. And we also have this @db.objectID to denote the type. This then allows us to verify that we're actually passing an object ID in Prisma Client. Then we have this first name of type string, last name, which is an optional string, and finally email, which is of type string and has this unique constraint added to it, a unique attribute. Now, that was one model, but what happens when you want to start introducing relationships? So here, I extend that model and then I add an additional one. I add the post model, and what I'm defining is I'm defining a one-to-many relationship between user and post. So that means that a single user can have multiple posts. And it should be noted that Prisma will use references to model this relationship. Now, take a moment to look at this schema, because the examples that will follow will be based on this. Okay, so what are the benefits? Well, working with databases is still one of the most challenging areas of application development. If you consider data modeling, schema migrations, writing database queries, these are common tasks that you have to deal with on a day-to-day basis as a developer. And as tools become more specialized, application developers should be able to focus on implementing value-adding features to their organizations instead of spending time plumbing together these layers of application by writing a lot of glue code. And so the core benefits of Prisma are productivity through shorter feedback loops with rich auto-completion and less boilerplate. And second, confidence, type-safe database queries that can be validated at compile time. And these two pillars are embedded into Prisma's workflows and API. So let's take a look at what Prisma Client looks like. So here I am showing a Prisma Client query that creates a document in the user collection. And I spoke about these two benefits before, productivity and confidence, but how does actually Prisma achieve this? Well, first thing is auto-completion in code editors instead of needing to look up documentation. You see that as I do the control space to show the allowed fields, I really can know what data I can actually persist in this, pass into this query. And as you can see here, I'm also passing an invalid field that isn't in the Prisma schema, and I immediately get this type error. Prisma also focuses on queries rather than classes to avoid these complex model objects that are very common in active record ORMs. Prisma Client simply exposes methods that return plain old objects. Prisma schema is the single source of truth for both your database schema and your application models. You get this type safety and of course less boilerplate so that you can really focus on the important part of your application. And so working with relationships is also quite a tricky part, and the nested API in Prisma Client makes it easy for you to reason about storing related data. And so in this example, we create one document in the user collection and two documents in the posts collection with a reference to that user who created. And we can see that because on the right-hand side, you may notice that the author ID is pointing to the same ID in the root object of the user. And so let's take a look at what that looks like in the database. And so that same query, if you look at it through MongoDB Compass, the sort of the MongoDB database GUI, which is more or less equivalent to what Prisma Studio does. You can also use Prisma Studio. You can already see how these are created. And here too, when you are working with an object that you created in the database, you still get the same degree of type safety when you're trying to access the data that was returned, the object that was returned from the Prisma Client query to MongoDB. And you have this, again, this full auto-completion. And this is done by really leveraging a lot of the functionality that the TypeScript type system provides. And so that was that. And I think it was pretty cool. I mean, I've been working with Prisma for a while now, and so I'm kind of used to this developer experience. But it is pretty amazing to see this in action, and it is worth sort of asking, how does this all work, and how does Prisma achieve this? And really, it all starts with the Prisma schema, a single source of truth, as I mentioned, and it is used to generate Prisma Client, which you then import into your application code. And since Prisma introduces a schema, and obviously we're talking about how to stay productive while still introducing change, most of us developers are actually constantly changing whatever we're building, new assumptions, new features, bug fixes, and so on. And in many times, those involve changes to also your database schema or your data model and the information that you want to store in your database. For example, imagine from Peter's example before that you wanted to add a view count for each post. You know, that would involve actually adding this new field to new documents that you're creating. And so how do you evolve this schema that you have when you're using Prisma? This is really where Prisma Migrate comes in, the declarative database migrations tool. And our vision at Prisma is to really enable developers to easily evolve their schema and manage database data migrations. We've already seen the great success of of many developers using Prisma with relational databases, and we want to take a lot of those insights and apply them into MongoDB too, of course, given all of the differences when working with MongoDB. And so introducing a schema to MongoDB poses a challenge because, as I touched on in the previous slide, how do you maintain that consistency across documents when you change the schema? For example, how do you add a new required field to a collection with existing data? This typically requires you to migrate existing documents so that they can adhere to the updated schema with this new required field. And there are several approaches to this. The first one is doing an all-at-once data migration, where essentially once you introduce the new feature, or even prior to that, you go to your database, you look at all of the existing documents and say you migrate them and add this new views field set to 0. There's also the on-demand approach, where you add a new field to your Prisma schema and then gradually update existing documents. And this is the approach also that Mongoose takes, and it's also possible with Prisma. So coming back again to the views, view count on posts example, assuming that you already have some posts in your collection in MongoDB and you want to introduce this new field, then you might want to sort of go and do a batch update to all of those, setting that to 0. That would be the all at once, and then doing it on demand would be every time you fetch it, you can either set a default, which means that the default will kick in and you will get 0 if it's not defined in the document, and then when you write it, it will get persisted in the next write to your database. Then you have the non-breaking change policy, where you essentially just introduce a policy in your continuous integration or whichever tooling you use to check basically to only allow adding fields and never allowing changing or removing fields. And then finally, you have the final approach, the background integrity checks, which is an approach where you essentially run checks for consistency in the background. And then when an inconsistency is found, you either alert the developer to update the data, or you, based on the structure of the data you in that code, you decide, okay, how I want to migrate this. So you might just do a routine check to see which documents don't have the view count field, and the ones who don't, you just set it to 0. Now, in the last 2 years, a number of new frameworks have chosen Prisma as their default ORM. You have Redwood.js, which was created by the GitHub co-founder, Tom Preston Werner, and it is a full stack framework based on React and GraphQL. You have Blitz, which is a full stack framework based on React that also does away with the API layer, essentially giving you a way to make calls directly from your front end to back end without having to think about the whole API layer. You have Keystone.js, a headless CMS that also uses Prisma under the hood. Implication, which is a toolset for building full stack apps based on React and Nest.js. And finally, Wasp, which is a DSL for developing full stack web apps with React. And so Prisma really is the result of the learnings that we've gathered from being an early innovator in the GraphQL ecosystems, and the insights we've gained into the data layers of many different companies, from small to mid-sized to even major enterprises. And as I reach the end of this talk, I'd like to share a bit more information about the current state of the MongoDB connector and also what you can expect in the near future. So since July 2021, a couple of months ago, I believe it was actually just a month ago, MongoDB support is now in preview, which means it's still not production ready, but it is already sort of started to stabilize. And there are a bunch of limitations that I thought are worth pointing out if you're planning to use Prisma with MongoDB. The first is that there's still no support for embedded documents that are typed. You can use embedded documents right now using just the JSON type in your Prisma schema, but we really want to enable developers to choose which data modeling approach they want to take. If you want to use references or if you want to do embedding. These are the sort of the two main approaches to data modeling in MongoDB. And so right now you can sort of use embedded documents using the JSON type, but in the very near future, and we already have a proposal that was published as part of the previous Prisma release about how you would be able to use the Prisma schema to type your embedded documents. There's also the second topic, which is indices. So currently you have to define an index directly in the database. And of course, our plan is to allow, as you define those, like if you add an @unique in your Prisma schema, that Prisma will automatically create those indices for you in the database. And then finally, adding Prisma to an existing project that uses MongoDB. And so as a big topic of the talk was how do you introduce a schema and how do you ensure consistency across documents? And when you want to introduce Prisma into an existing project, our current thinking is that you should be able to sort of have Prisma introspect your database and create, of course, populate the Prisma schema, but also create a feedback loop to inform you about all sorts of inconsistencies across documents in your MongoDB collection. And so we plan on moving really forward with all of these things, and this is also where you come in. So if you are interested in this, I would highly recommend you to check out the Prisma MongoDB connector and provide us feedback. And so that way we can address these quickly and bring the MongoDB connector to GA. And so just to sort of summarize today's talk, we looked at some of the practices that increase productivity as a developer by looking at type safety and feedback loops. We then looked at some of the parallels between types and schemas and explored the different solutions to having a schema in MongoDB. And finally, we looked at the confluence of these ideas in Prisma and how it enables you essentially to be more productive with your MongoDB database. And so on that note, I'm excited to invite you to try it out. You can do that at pris.ly/mongo. That will redirect you to our Getting Started guide. And with that, I'd like to thank you for listening, and I'd be happy to take any questions if you may have. We also have, I should point out, we also have some of these MongoDB Prisma stickers, and I'll find the link. If you're interested, we can send them to you for free. So that was that from me, and thank you once again.
Thank you very much for this talk. I really enjoyed it. I wanted to say a bit more about it, and I like the last slide where you have the journey for the Prisma and how it has evolved. I've been using it from version 1 where you had to have a GraphQL client, and then I was quite excited when I found out that you can just use the client directly with your code. You don't have to have another layer of the GraphQL layer. You don't need to actually learn GraphQL. You just straight write JavaScript or TypeScript to be more type safe. And that's a cool thing about type safety. We can also bring Peter as well in the panel, so we can have like a small discussion between the three of us.
Certainly.
Cool. Yeah. So thank you both of you for this nice talk. I have one question before we start this conversation that came up. There are a lot of people that currently use different databases with Prisma. You can use SQLite. You can use other databases. How difficult will it be to migrate from another database to MongoDB with a new connector?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess it really depends on which database you want to migrate from. In all of my experience, I've rarely encountered a situation in which a company just decides, oh yeah, we're going to switch from Postgres to MongoDB, no problem, because the tooling is just not being there to really allow for these kinds of things. And especially if you're dealing with companies and applications that really require a lot of require high availability and that they're constantly accepting traffic, this can be a real challenge. But if you are in a situation where you have the privilege of, say, shutting the application down, putting it in maintenance mode for a couple of hours, theoretically you could do a migration like that from one database to another. But on that note, I think it's also worth pointing out that usually, you pick a database very early when you start a project, and it's rare that you change it, and you usually pick that database for whatever reasons you had when you chose it. And so while it is possible to do these kinds of migrations, and really Prisma gives you a unified API where you essentially interact with one database and another more or less the same way, of course there's nuanced differences between how each of these work, then it should be possible. But in general, sort of MongoDB really encourages a lot of denormalization, whereas relational databases take the opposite approach, where they encourage you to normalize your data. And so while it is possible, I'm not sure how many people are actually facing this this problem.
Yeah. No, it makes sense. Because the sort of big key thing about Prisma is that you can connect any database you want. You can do Postgres, you can do MongoDB, you can do SQLite. It's very easy to host your application in Heroku or Netlify or Vercel, I suppose. So yeah, it's environment friendly to any kind of environment. Yeah. Peter, do you have anything you would like to discuss or ask?
Yep, certainly. First of all, thank you, Daniel, for the great presentation. It was something that I really was looking forward to. Something that I would really like to add is that the inspiration that came from what you showcased about the different layers that an application involves. For example, the presentation layer, the application layer, and the database layer. Actually, I was really surprised. I was pleasantly surprised in the way that the typings that are generated from the Prisma client. Basically, if also you can see the showcase repo of our example application, the only types that exist across server, client, and also any code that has to do with data access layer, they are the types generated from Prisma. So for all the engineers out there trying to architect an application and want to have this let's say this type safety and the capability to minimize errors as much as possible, I consider that a superpower. Having the types, sharing them between the application layer and the database layer, which Prisma has the full control of the objects and the entities that are flown from one side to the other, and even on the view layer side of things. For example, in my application, I used exactly the same types, and everything was great. So I consider the modern stack with TypeScript, typed interfaces, and all the great work that you have done on the MongoDB connector. It gives you superpowers. So yeah, congrats on that.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you also for sharing your perspective and giving the talk, really showing how this would be used in practice.
Yep, and actually this could have been just a showcase, but to be honest, in most of the, let's say, the companies that I've worked and the projects that I've undertaken from enterprise down to startup level, etc., the correct modeling and a reliance on these simple structures which flow across all the let's say the specific layers and let's say the APIs, the client interfaces of an application. This is what makes a product, let's say, less error prone, much more, let's say, testable, which is something that we haven't touched in this talk, but it's something of much importance, of great importance. And yeah, certainly this all starts with the main types of the entities that you have. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to what other stuff will be built with all this modern and next generation ORM that you're introducing there.
Yeah, likewise. I also think it's, we had a comment from someone who wrote tricky part, not connecting, but most likely migrating all the data from one database to the other. And I totally agree with that comment.
Yeah, the cool thing about Clerk and Prisma is the the speed, because most of us we have to create stuff quite quickly. The expectations for developers is it has increased. There are too many projects to do, but there are not many developers, and that's what most of the clients find right now. So, as a front-end developer myself, um, the difficulty is that I don't know a lot about Node. I don't have to do all this kind of stuff that Prisma does for me. So just the only thing I need to do is to create all these endpoints and start using them straight away. And with migration, I think one of your slides that you shared with us is when you change something changes in the data, you are able to see that, right? Could you tell us a bit more about that and explain how that will be quite beneficial for the front end developers themselves? How much time they would
Yeah.
save?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's maybe worth starting with, say, relational databases, because that's where these kinds of migrations are really something that you plan in advance. The whole point, with MongoDB is that you have this loose schema. So, assuming you're using a relational database and you wanted to add a new field or a new column, so to say, and I think I can give the example of, say, you have a user model and you have a post model. They have a one-to-many relation between the two, and you want to now introduce a new field to the post model, and that is a view count. So how would you approach this with a relational database, and what does that mean for you as a front-end developer? The first thing is, how would you introduce this change? Well, the first question you have to ask is, do you want this to be a required field? I generally lean on making something optional only when it actually is absolutely optional. The moment that you make too many things optional, you create too many variants. So unless you absolutely need it to be optional, I will usually introduce a new field as something that is required. And that obviously poses a challenge, because what do you do with the existing records that you have that don't have this? And so the general approach is you can use a default, once you introduce that to your Prisma schema, you run Prisma Migrate dev. This is the part of Prisma Migrate, which the command that generates the SQL migration for you. And when you create that, you can actually edit the SQL and define how you want this new field to impact existing existing records or rows. And so you have the option of either setting the default, which will automatically apply to all of the existing ones that didn't have it, or you can actually manually go ahead and edit the SQL and modify existing documents based on whatever parameters and whatever logic you decide. The moment that you finish that, Prisma client is already generated for you, and you have access to that field through the types, and you can sort of, if you're building an API, you can also send that through the API. If you're using something like GraphQL, you might want to say, oh, I want to introduce this to the post type in my GraphQL schema, and it will have, say, the type integer. And then the moment that it's in your GraphQL schema, of course, this really depends on how your front end interacts with the back end. But assuming that it's a GraphQL schema, then essentially you now have the option to query that field through your GraphQL schema, and then you can choose to use that in your front end. That is more or less sort of like the approach that you would take when introducing a new feature using Prisma and a GraphQL API. With REST, it's also more or less the same. You can just add the field to the API endpoint, and then it's up to the front end to decide how to use that field that it now receives in the same API call. Does that make sense?
Yep. Yeah, it sounds really cool. Yeah, it's some of these features that the people maybe don't know, and when you know, it's like it saves a lot of time. Like that's the main kind of benefit. And yeah, definitely. What is the next features that they are coming up with Prisma? So that you are very excited about, because I think there are many, but some of them
Yeah.
that you are very excited about.
Well, should probably start with all of the preview features that hopefully will reach general availability in the very near future. And so one of those is obviously the MongoDB connector. There's also the SQL Server connector, which is going to be released to general availability. There's also some added Prisma client functionality, like the ability to order by relations. But one of the things I'm really, really excited about is I think Prisma has already gotten to the point where the Prisma client API is quite robust. And it really allows you almost the same flexibility that you would get with other ORMs, if not I mean, the developer experience, in my opinion, is obviously better. And we've really played a lot of catch up in really providing all of this functionality that it now provides. And I think what will become really interesting is the Prisma Cloud product. So we're working on the Prisma Data Proxy. And the idea with the Prisma Data Proxy is that it will give you, it is part of the Prisma Cloud product that we're building right now. And the data proxy is going to make it a lot easier for developers who are using serverless to use Prisma with serverless, because one of the main challenges today for using a relational database with serverless, and irrespective if you're using Prisma or any other tool, is that a serverless function can only handle a single user connection. Unlike Node.js processes that can handle, their whole point is that they can handle multiple HTTP connections. So what actually happens, say if you deploy a Versal app that connects to a database, is that each time someone calls the API, a function starts and a function actually initiates a connection to the database in order to send the query. And why is this a problem? Well, you basically end up having as many connections to the database as you have user requests. This is with serverless, whereas with the more traditional Heroku kind of style, where you deploy your app and you have a single instance that handles multiple requests, you have a single server that maintains an open connection to the database and can handle and multiplex multiple user requests. And why is this a problem with serverless? Well, databases, actually, it's quite expensive with most relational databases. To open up a new connection to the database. The first thing you have is TLS termination, which adds some overhead. But beyond that, actually, the database itself has to allocate resources in order to open up a connection to it. And so every time this happens, applications that use a relational database with serverless, they tend to suffer from a lot of performance problems. And so the general sort of approach to this problem has been to introduce something like a connection puller. But if you're using serverless, the whole point is that you want to avoid the operational overhead of deploying stuff to the cloud. So the moment that you have to suddenly introduce a connection puller like PG Bouncer, you actually eliminate sort of the benefit that you got from serverless, making you not have to worry about infrastructure. And so the idea with this the Prisma Data Proxy is really to make it easy for any developer using Prisma with any of the supported databases, really to get this free data proxy, which essentially solves this problem for you. This is only one part of the cloud product, and the vision is much broader. You can already today use the cloud product. You can go to cloud.prisma.io. And what you can do is you can create a new project, you can create a new Prisma project, and also provision a database in Heroku. All of this is free and available. And you get sort of an online data explorer, and you can invite collaborators that can also view the data. And so I really think that sort of the future of Prisma really lies in sort of two facets. The first facet is really improving Prisma, the actual open source stuff, so that you can really have the full flexibility to do everything you want. And then the second thing is really adding some more functionality to the cloud product to really improve the workflows for mid-sized and even larger teams. But the sort of the grand vision is really that the Prisma together with the cloud product can really help you stay productive from the stage of being, a weekend indie hacker's pirate all the way to becoming a large-scale company. So I hope that answers your question.
If you go that way, where is your data located? Is it in Prisma, in the Prisma cloud, or is it in you can host somewhere else?
I mean, you fully control your database, so you can connect it to any supported database, or you can use the UI in order to provision a database on Heroku. You currently can do that. Yeah, we don't own your database. We're just sort of sitting in the middle and just enabling a lot of the workflows around it and the connection pooling with the data proxy.
That's cool. Peter, do you have any question you wanna?
Well, actually, this let's say what Daniel has explained, like sounds pretty excited. Let's say I've seen some similar solutions in more, let's say, closed provider spaces. For example, the Amazon RDS proxy, which does the thing, but it's internal to AWS. So I really consider, let's say, the case that you don't need to own the data, but provide this thing for the client. That's a great benefit. And certainly it pertains a whole slew of excellent technology there. And definitely the concept of Prisma becoming more like a place that you can, let's say, start as Daniel said, your pirate project up to, let's say, the enterprise requirements, and providing this cloud interface certainly would, let's say, because at least in my perspective, the Prisma developer experience is excellent. And I mean the actual in the trenches experience, not someone that a product manager would say, but as an engineer working with this product. And definitely the capability to become also something more, let's say, a collaborative tool in the cloud like Airtable is. I believe this is close to what's been teased here for like one feature set of the Prisma Cloud, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, I think that's a great space to be in. Yeah, that would be it. I'm pretty excited for the features that are coming over. Really cool, Daniel.
Thank you very much. And I thought maybe if we have a couple of moments, I can quickly share my screen and maybe give a quick overview of the cloud platform, because you sort of like talked about Airtable and how it might compare, and I thought that if you'd be interested, I'd be happy to sort of give like a quick demo. Do we have time for that, Aris?
We have like 5-10 minutes max.
Yeah, I don't need that long even. So I'll just quickly share my screen here. So basically here I logged into the Prisma Cloud platform. Again, either of you can just go ahead and try it out at cloud.prisma.io. And this is a project that I've already sort of, I have it deployed. I think it's deployed to Railway in the cloud platform. And basically here I can view my schema for this project. This is actually coming from the GitHub project. So if I open up GitHub, really this is just pulling it from here. And really the nice thing that I can do here is, first of all, I can invite users and give them different roles. So for example, I could give Peter some viewer access, which means he would be able to explore the data in the database without the ability to change it. And then we have the data browser, which is essentially a hosted version of Prisma Studio. And here really I'm directly interacting with my database. And so I can add records. And there we go. And now it should reload in a moment. And there we go. We have it. And so, you know, you get all of this functionality. I can explore the relations. I can open them up. And really, I have the full ability to access my data directly. So this is where it is right now. And the idea, then one of the next features will be to give you the ability to use the data proxy so that you can connect it through here. And also there's going to be a query console, which means that you'll be able to actually try out Prisma Client from within the browser and sort of like get a feel for the different queries. And you can do that against, you know, your real database. So these are some of the things. And of course, the onboarding flow, you know, you can, if you're really new to Prisma, you can just go to create new project. You can JS monthly London. You can actually just create a new project. I'm going to provision a database. I hope that my Heroku account can handle this, because I think I've already created so many free databases on Heroku that I'm not sure it'll allow me to do that. Okay, I have to log in. So I won't do that now, but the idea is that it will provision a database for you. It will actually create the database schema from a bunch of samples that you can choose, and you can really like already get a feel for Prisma. So that's basically where the Prisma Cloud product is. And yeah, if anyone's interested, you can already check it out today. So that was it from my side. Thank you for the space to do this and to show it.
Great. I'll definitely check it out.
Yeah, no, that was really good. I like that. Because when I first tried Prisma version 2 on a hackathon, I had to do like a hack to upload to run the migrate function on Heroku, where this is like pretty straightforward to do. It's yeah. I'm laughing, but it's laughing from excitement. But yeah, it's amazing.
Good.
Okay, so yeah, I think we're gonna end it here, but it has been a really nice meetup. We did a bit more because we had so many questions from the hall. I think the guys at Cleric, they have in their roadmap also to do a Prisma integration. So it's quite exciting that we have you both on this meetup. And yeah, we have another meetup in 12 days. So we will have another like Prisma talk there. And yeah, I will see you all in the conference. I hope you can watch it online, or if you happens to pass by London, you can say hi and be there. But thank you very much for everything. And your talks are going to be going online, hopefully, and people can watch them later. Have a good day.
Thank you,
Good.
Aris, and thank you, Peter.
Thanks.
All the best, and thank you to the viewers at home.
Thank
Bye,
you,
everyone.
Bye-bye.